This is the last of this series of classes. Maybe, perhaps, B'ezras Hashem, we'll have one more before Pesach, but as for the time being, this is the last one. This series, Redemption to Redemption. The first three on Purim, this B'ezras Hashem is on Pesach. Even though it's only one session, and there's so much to talk about in Pesach, I'd easily go on for many different classes. And I actually have quite a few videos already up on YouTube from previous years. The Gemara brings down, I believe it's in the end of Makos, that certain David HaMelech and certain Nevi'im, they're able to reduce the Torah down to a single pasuk, single idea, concept. 1 to 13 psukim, 1 to a few psukim. Finally, the last is to, I think it was Chavakuk who got it down to one pasuk that sums up the entire Torah, in a sense. It's been pointed out that the mitzvahs, of course, are 613, 6 plus 1 plus 3 equals 10, 1 plus 0 is 1, and all mitzvahs really are one mitzvah. Everything flows from that. And the same idea is that for the most part, you can reduce, you can take all the concepts of Pesach, and there's like one particular idea that's kind of the hinge, it's kind of the pin that it revolves around, and use that to elaborate. You can go from there and explain the whole Agada, explain the entire holiday. But I think that one of the most important points that has to be brought out, and I know I've made this several times in the past, and not everyone's always heard it before, and besides, we forget it. The Gemara says that after 12 months we forget things. It's been more than 12 months, so more than likely, it's worth going over the idea. And it's basically like this, that we're told that the reason we eat matzah, which is unleavened bread, which is not chometz, is because there was not enough time to bake bread. There's not enough time to bake bread, and the reason we're told that there was not enough time to bake bread is because we left Mitzrayim b'chipazon, meaning quickly. We had to race out of Mitzrayim. The truth is, if you look in the Psukim, the Torah itself says that we are thrown out. The Mitzrayim, they pushed us out, they shoved us out, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu had told Moshe Rabbeinu way back at the beginning, back by the burning bush, that at the end, when it's all said and done, it was hard to believe at that time because the plagues hadn't begun, they were still enslaved in Mitzrayim. But at the end, was all said and done, all the plagues had happened, that the Mitzrayim would throw us out. Hard to imagine that it would come to that, how it could come to that, but that's what Hashem said. And here, finally in Parashat, that's exactly what they do. They push us out. They beg Paro to send the Jewish people away, even though they think it's only for 3 days at the beginning, but they almost don't care. And they say, Kulan Meisim, we're all dead people. And because of that, they don't want to have the situation anymore where their lives are in danger because the Jewish people are still in Mitzrayim. So, we had to leave quickly. And at the Haggadah, we were supposed to stand up, put the matzah over our shoulders, like they carried the dough on their backs, and it was baked by the sun, and with our staffs, and like to dramatize the whole concept of bechipazon. That's a major theme in the story of leaving Mitzrayim. So, why did we leave bechipazon? Why did we have to leave Mitzrayim so quickly? 3 million Jews, a lot more Erev Rav. It's hard to imagine leaving quickly with that many people, and included a lot of elderly people and children and women. It's like people can't travel so quickly necessarily. Even the men, not everyone can leave so quickly. But nonetheless, that's what we're told. And the main reason that has been passed down seemingly from generation to generation as to why we had to leave so quickly, which is a reason why we didn't have time to bake bread, which is the reason why you have matzah, which is the centerpiece of the Haggadah and the Seder and the whole thing for a whole week, can't have chumetz, etc., is because the Jewish people were teetering on the brink of spiritual oblivion. They had assimilated in Mitzrayim down to the point of what's called Mem Tesh Shari Tuma. It's an argument amongst them, but fortunately, the commentaries, but there's actually 50, but it doesn't really matter because just getting to 49 is so bad, it's so spiritually deadly that you don't need 50 in the end. And that's what they were holding. When Moshe Rabbeinu showed up in Mitzrayim, he said to the Jewish people, we're going to go out this month, and they're holding Mem Tesh Shari Tuma. And if Hashem had not saved them when he did, then we would have been lost forever. We would have been slaves to Paro forever because we would be unsavable. There'd be nothing spiritually worth saving in the Jewish people. We'd be past the point of no return, which is hard to even fathom, because we've seen in our own lifetime how it's so possible for a person to be extremely secular and totally cut off, and yet at some point be able to do tshuva and come back. So what does it mean there with the point of spiritual oblivion? But that's what it says, and for that reason, the Jewish people had to be taken out right away. That there was not enough time to bake bread, which of course we accept and we teach and we give over, and it's part of the Haggadah, part of the telling of the story, and we're grateful to Hashem for taking us out so quickly. Except it's not true, not even a little bit. Well, I mean, it is a little bit true, but not there. It's not true. The idea of being at the point of spiritual oblivion, that's true. The idea of being on the 49th level of spiritual impurity, that's true, 100%. But not there, not then, not on the last night the Jewish people spent in Mitzrayim, not at the Seder. I mean, who makes a Seder and does Korban Pesach when they're holding on the 49th level of spiritual impurity? Who does bris milah? Who doesn't? Who can connect? And how could you even be on that level at that stage if, in fact, God Himself, as the Haggadah says, is the one carrying out the plague, the last plague? So there's a tremendous revelation and gilui of Hashem. He Himself is doing this market. How can you be? Not only that, but Paro, who clearly is the representation, the representative of the Mem Tesh Sharitim. He's the king of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the king. It's a place of the Yetzer Hara. It's a representation of the Yetzer Hara in the history of that time. There's always one nation that specifically represents Yetzer Hara more than any other nation in any generation. That was Mitzrayim at that time. And he admits to the reality of Hashem. In the beginning, he says, "Mi Hashem." And now he knows who Hashem is, and he says to Moshe, pray to Hashem, daven for me, I shouldn't die, I lost my son, he's a Bechor, I'm a Bechor, please. He admits it. So if Paro, and seemingly the Mitzrayim, and by the way, that's already by the 10th plague. By the 3rd plague, the plague of Kini, and the first plague, the Chatumim, they can do the same thing. Paro's magicians, they can make water become blood. You can use black magic for that too. A little bit curious as to why they didn't take it away, but that's a different story. The second one, they can also make frogs too. They can make tons of, and they did the same thing, as if the frogs that they already had wasn't bad enough. To make it their point, Paro brought more frogs, and it's even worse because they couldn't get rid of them, but also even the ones that they themselves made, they couldn't get rid of, because black magic lasts, as I think the Or Chaim points out. One of the things about black magic, you can cast a spell, but you can't undo it. It's got a time limit before it finally stops and fades away. Even the best magician, like a Bilam or a Balak, they can't undo a spell that they've cast with real black magic. That's part of what Moshe was saying, that I can. And that shows that I'm not doing magic. I'm working on behalf of Hashem. This is a nace. It's a Kodesh Baruch. It's the Ratzon of God that I'm fulfilling. That's why I can make these things start and stop whenever I want. That was part of the show, part of the lesson he was giving over to the people at that time. And by the 3rd plague, by Kini, right, by the lice, so they can't do it because, as the Or Chaim points out, black magic only works to a certain level. On a certain size, it can't have an effect. So they could not have an effect on life, but Moshe could. So they say, okay, they're not going to go the full distance. They're not going to say Hashem, not going to say the hand of Hashem, which is more pronounced than the finger of Hashem, but they do say the finger, the Esper Elokim. They're moda. Already by the 3rd plague, the Egyptians, who are literally the repository of spiritual impurity in the world at that time, and they admit that God's behind this, and it's going to get more intense as time goes on. And the Jewish people are not. They're not seeing this. They're not being moda. They're not agreeing. They didn't disbelieve in God in the first place, and they're not seeing what the Egyptians are seeing. So that's the case. How could they even be on Mem Teshari Tuma, the 49th level of spiritual impurity, by the time it comes time to leave Mitzrayim, the night before, the day before, the month before, 2 months before, 6 months before. How could they be? So the answer, of course, is they weren't. But what about this tradition that we say, that we hold, that we were if it wasn't for the fact that God saved us? Well, if you look, it doesn't say where He saved us. It doesn't say that had He not saved us at the last night, at the end of the exile, we would have been lost. It doesn't say that. He just had not saved us when He did. And when did He do that? When He sent Moshe Rabbeinu down to Mitzrayim to begin the plagues. In other words, in advance of Makas Dam, in advance of the plague of blood, Moshe was sent down, by God to save the Jewish people. And had God not intervened at that time, when we're holding on Mem Teshari Tuma, then we would have been lost forever. Nothing would have survived from that point onward. But once the plagues began, so plague by plague was an increased revelation of the reality of God. It was an education in Hashkafa, and we began to become more aware of Hashem. So gradually, we went from step to step. It only took 10 plagues, and we climbed out completely of the Mem Teshari Tuma and got to the Nun Shari Kedusha, and there was no reason to leave quickly to save the Jewish people. Aside from the fact that the problem by matzah is not having, not enough time. It's having too much time. Everyone, it's the most obvious thing in the world. We know. They even printed on the side of boxes of matzah, 18-minute matzahs. Why do we have to know that? That these matzahs were made within 18 minutes. That they were never left sitting for 18 minutes without being worked before being baked. Because we know that's all it takes. 18 minutes of sitting there doing nothing will make chametz gamor, complete chametz. So the problem never was not having enough time to bake bread. On the contrary, God had to work hard, keviyochel, so to speak, to make sure we had matzah. Because the chance of somebody having bread, right? I made matzah, well, I made bread. 2 million people didn't get to their bread fast enough, and now it's bread, not matzah. It's like, it's a miracle. It's an absolute miracle that everybody had kosher matzah on Leil Seder, because they had all kinds of time to bake bread. They had all kinds of things to do in advance of the redemption. That's the miracle. The miracle is there was kosher matzah, and then we didn't have chametz. Today, we have all these ovens and we have bakeries and we have control of the situation and chaburas and all. And if you ever watch a chabura baking, hand matzahs, it's a frantic, frenetic experience. They're rushing. Everyone's like watching the mashkir, to make sure that you don't make chametz, because it's that easy to make chametz, that easy. So we have to have mashkichim to make sure the matzah is kosher, and the briskers are machmir. They won't even have it unless it's burnt, and it's like that's so what's the whole bechipazon thing in the end? So the Leshem explains, 100%. That's what the Egyptians are saying. Get rid of them, because the koiches of Tuma are so weak. On the night of the first Seder in Mitzrayim, the Paro was a broken man. He's going through the streets looking for Moshe Rabbeinu, calling out to him, "Where's Moshe? Where's Aaron? Please go, go, go." The Egyptians are begging them to go, go, go. That means, by definition, that the koiches of Tuma are weak. If the koiches of Tumah are weak, the koiches of Kedusha are strong. If the koiches of Kedusha are strong, that means by definition the Jewish people did not have to leave to save themselves. So who were they saving? It sounds a little strange at first until you understand what's really going on over here. Turns out we had to leave Mitzrayim b'chipazon quickly to save the koiches of Tumah, to save evil, to save Paro, to save the Mitzrayim. Because if we had stayed in Mitzrayim a little bit longer, the light of Hashem would have kept coming to the world, flowing down to the Jewish people, would have been so intense and so powerful as it will be in the Messianic era. It would have destroyed evil completely. That's why we had to leave. That shouldn't happen. Why not? That's a good thing. The whole point of history is to get to a point where we can destroy evil. Yes, you're right, 100%. But this is the beginning of history. This is prior to Mount Sinai. The Jewish people had not used their bechira, their free will to choose the redemption, to choose to rise out of the Mem Tesh Shari Tumah on their own. They didn't do that. God gave it as a gift, and primarily because of a thing called Bris Avos, the covenant made with the forefathers. So we had to be saved because God told Abraham that we're going to go down to, be strangers in the land, not ours, for 400 years. But the 8th generation from him will come out from Mitzrayim, and they'll go to Eretz Yisrael and they'll inherit the land. So that had to be fulfilled. In order to fulfill that, God had to save some of the Jewish people. In order to save the Jewish people, they had to be brought out of Mitzrayim while they were still could be saved and receive Torah. But they also had to preserve free will. And free will, by definition, requires two things: a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, good and evil. Destroy evil, there's no choice. Destroy the Yetzer Hara, there's no Bechir anymore. And you must have Mashiach, we're going to do that, because history will be over. We'll have gone through all the exiles, we received Torah, we lived by Torah, we did the mitzvahs, we learned the Torah, right? We'll have done everything, been there, done it, the whole thing will have been done. And then we can afford to destroy the Yetzer Hara either because we deserve to do it or because God himself will do it. But either way, history will come to an end, and Bechir, free will be over forever, because the period of time of earning reward for the world to come will be over. So, talk about nafachu. This is like turns the whole story over in its head, because here's the matzah, the centerpiece of the Seder, basically, and the whole thing revolves around it. It's got such meaning, and Avraham made matzah on hundreds of years before there was even an Egyptian exile, and matzah goes back to Adam Marisha. It's a thing, in Kabbalah, matzah is everything. Matzah symbolizes the whole concept of tikkun olam. Chometz is pre-tikkun, olam tohu, chaos. Chametz is, in fact, the tikkun itself. It's diagrammatically represented by the ches of chametz, the leg, the left leg of the ches, and the word chametz is broken into two, which now becomes like a hay. So the ches is broken into a hay, and it transforms the word chametz into matzah, and that's the whole tikkun. That's the whole tikkun of Ma'aseh Bereshit, 6,000 years of history and sinning and tshuva and exile and rectification and Mashiach, all broken down into this little leg of a letter that becomes a hay. That's how central matzah is. That's how important matzah is. But it's not merely a commemoration of the redemption that God gave the Jewish people. They took us out, all the miracles he performed. It's more of a reminder of what was left undone, what the Jewish people didn't do, what we're still waiting to do. It's almost like the matzah sits there on the Seder table looking at us saying, what? You're still making a Seder? After all these thousands of years, you're still in exile? You still haven't got the message yet? Still haven't had that choice? Get with the program. Get going. Use the Seder to accomplish what wasn't accomplished. That's what the matzah is saying to us every single year. Rectify the world. Because that's what it's all hinging on that. It's not just a commemoration, a celebration, family get-together, a lot of fun for that. It's all those things. You can have all the fun you want at the Seder, but you have to understand what it's telling you, what we're here to accomplish. And even though your neighbor's not doing it, and that neighbor's not doing it, and this person's not doing it, and we're all the same thing year after year after year after year, at some point in time, we'll stand before Kodesh Baruch Hu, and he's going to say to us, why didn't I gave you a Seder? I gave you a Pesach, a holiday Pesach, and a Seder. Why didn't you use it to fix the world, to fix yourself first, and then your community, and your all the information, all the tools, all the the mechanization of what you need to do to implement in order to be able to accomplish. It's all built into the Seder itself. Different pieces, different parts of the puzzle just put together, and the message becomes pretty clear. So, so what is that message? What is it ultimately? So there's different parts. You can look at, there's each element of the Haggadah, even if it evolved over time, it wasn't accidental. It was placed, where it was and says what it does and has the minhagim traditions to do what it does because it's all meant to affect our consciousness. Because that's what it's about. It's all about our consciousness. Consciousness is everything. We're so used to being in this physical world and accomplishing physical things in physical ways with physical means that we don't realize how the whole world revolves around the spiritual reality. That's why Moshe was told to talk to the rock. That's why they were supposed to pick up one omer of man and just say L'chad Shabbos Kodesh and watch it become 2 omers of man for Shabbos. The power of dibur, the power of speech. Hashem used speech to make the world. That's why the letter Pei in Safrus has a base built into, because the base is Bereshis and the Pei is the mouth, and Hashem spoke. He spoke creation into existence. We're so physical. We're so used to doing everything in such a physical way that we've almost abandoned our spiritual capabilities and power that Hashem invested in us by giving us the Torah. So how do we get that back? So that's part of what the Seder is all about. That's what the Haggadah is all about. So in a sense, I think that, some things are it's more pronounced, it's more, real, it's more impactful than other parts of it. And I think the part that gets to me at least the most, and I think it really does sum things up, the Chacham obviously is the Chacham, he's the hero of the story. He asks all the right questions. He's the one that's on the ball, and he's the zealot, and he's prepared to go, and he's loyal, and you can count on him, and he's all those good things wrapped up in a single individual. We all want to be like the Chacham, at least most of us do. But the reality is, he doesn't tell you that much. He asked a good question. The question is, what are those things, these mitzvahs that God commanded? I want to understand them. I want to integrate them into my own consciousness and being. And I need your information, your input, your knowledge, your wisdom to do that. So would you mind explaining everything to me in detail? I'm going to listen and stay awake and pay attention, please. Great. If you're a teacher, he's the ideal student. Right? A+ the whole way through. Teachers, but you name it. And he's the model citizen. Is the thing to live up to, whatever level you can. But again, he doesn't tell you that much. But you know who does? In a sense, he's like the negative star of the story, but he's like the star of the story because of the fact of what he says. In the end, he's the bad guy because he's called the Rasha, right? He's the evil one, the evil son. But what he's asking, what he's saying, his input into the Seder, the fact that he's there itself is amazing. But his whole question really sums up everybody, all of us. I mean, most of us are going, that's not me. I'm not the Rasha. I would never do that. I'm here making the Seder, celebrating the Seder. I believe I'm like the Chacham. The truth is, yes, and not completely, because we all have some of the Rasha inside of us. Well, how's that? Once you understand, ever done a chet? Ever done a sin? Ever rationalized your chet? Ever not done tshuva for something? Ever complained about? Say, ever complained against God? Ever got angry at God? Yeah, at some point in time, we've all done things like that. That's all part of being the Rasha. You're not a Rasha. Baruch Hashem. A Rasha is somebody who becomes the embodiment of that anti-God reality, the person who rejects the Torah. Thank God that's not us. So we're not the Rasha, Baruch Hashem, but we have some of that inside of us. And the Haggadah is addressing that. The Haggadah is telling, we all have the four sons inside of all of us. We have the Chacham, the Rasha, and the Shol, the Tam. There's different times, different stages of life, different moments in our year where we might be a Tam, and the Shol, might be a Chacham, might be a Rasha. It depends. You just have to know what you're being and how to deal with the situation to make the best of it and grow closer to God in the end. So what does the Rasha ask? What's his question? Ma ha'avoda zos lechem. He's talking about the Korban Pesach, we're told primarily. What does this Korban Pesach mean to you? Why are you doing this Korban Pesach? Why is he asking this question? Because he's saying, that it doesn't make sense anymore. Why not? Because we're not in Mitzrayim anymore. We're gone. This is a Seder. We've moved on. We're out of Mitzrayim. We may have other problems, other avodah zarahs, but the Korban Pesach primarily was given to us by Hashem to allow us to make a separation between ourselves and the Egyptian people. We're not going to worship their gods anymore. We're not going to be involved in their avodah zarah anymore, and we're even going to stand up to them by bringing their God as our sacrifice to our God. And that was important back in Mitzrayim. The first Korban Pesach, 100%, you had to do it. It was important. It was symbolic. It was real. But today, 100 years later, 1,000 years later, 3,000 years later, we'd still be doing Korban Pesach today if we could. Some people do, but we would do it in the Beis Hamikdash where it belongs. We don't do that today because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. But we would, and we acknowledge it, and we symbolically, talk about it as if we could still do it today. And the Rasha says, it doesn't wash with me. I don't understand why that would be a reality today when it's not something that we have to deal with. So the answer back to the Rasha, of course, is that you break his teeth because, he's not asking a good question. We don't like his question. We don't even discuss it. Tell him, how could you ask a question like that? If you tell, a Talmud, a student asks a question like that, you don't break his teeth right away. You talk to him and try and understand where he's coming from to help him work at the issue, but not this Rasha. This Rasha, we break his teeth. And then we go the one step further by saying to him, and not just that, but had you been Mitzrayim, you would not have gone out. Now that's a very important point. That's probably one of the most important lines in the entire Haggadah, right there. Had you been in Mitzrayim, you probably would not have gone out. Because God would have forgotten about you? Well, yeah, maybe you would have been part of the 4/5 that died in the plague of darkness. You would have been one of the 4/5, perhaps, I guess, or maybe you would have died before, but none really died before that we know of. So I guess you would have been one of the 4/5. You would not have gone out because you wouldn't have wanted to have gone out. The 4/5 died in Makas Choshech, in the plague of darkness, not because God simply got angry and killed them. It's because they had 7 plagues, or 8 plagues to choose to go out of Mitzrayim with Moshe Rabbeinu and go to Mount Sinai and receive the Torah and fulfill the prophecy and the promises made to Avram and all the Avos. And they either mentally or verbally or both said, we don't want to leave Mitzrayim. Why not? Well, the Medrash addresses this and says because they were used to having power and position and all that, and they're worried that by going to Eretz Yisrael, they'll lose all that. Whatever the reason is, they didn't want to go. And because they didn't want to go, Hashem said, that's the whole reason why I'm doing all this. It wasn't just to free you from Egyptian slavery that you can remain in Egypt. I did it to take you there to Eretz Kenaz. The Pasuk says in Vayikra, in Parashat Bahar, I took you out of Mitzrayim to bring you to Eretz Canaan to bring your God. And the Gemara takes it so literally. The Gemara says, unless you live in Eretz Yisrael, it's like you don't have a God. That's how serious it is. That's enough reason for a person to yearn to be in Eretz Yisrael no matter what. How could you not, be missing the place if you're a firm Jew? And it tells you that, right? Well, that's what we tell him. You wouldn't have wanted to go. Had you been in Mitzrayim, you would not have wanted to go because of what you're asking right now. Because the way you're asking your question, because why are you asking this question the first time? What do you even care? What does it make a difference? If this is what Chazal say, this is what the Torah said, but not even Chazal, but the Torah is what God has said. God commanded Moshe, Korban Pesach. This is what God is saying. So, what do you care? And who says you anyhow? I won't mention names, but it's an amazing thing how a person can believe in evolution today and exclude the reality of God and get angry at people who still believe in God despite it, as if they have, the person who's getting angry checked the whole universe, understands creation frontwards and backwards, and knows everything there's to know about God and how the world works. To be able to say that, I'm sorry, I checked the whole thing out. You're going on blind faith, you're going on a tradition, but I went from one corner of the universe to the other corner of the universe, and I went from the biggest to the smallest. There's no corner I have left empty, no stone unturned. And after looking at all the evidence, I can tell you, God does not exist. Not even close. Not even close. What do they have? They have a personal opinion based upon information that they've looked at from a specific mabat perspective, and that's the conclusion they've come to. And it's risky. I think I've told the story before, and I'm it's I don't know if it really happened, but at HaShavua there was a legend, there was a story of somebody who was trying to do outreach on somebody who was very adamant that God didn't exist, and he, even in spite of all the evidence, and he had to admit to certain things, he just wouldn't allow himself to say, yes, God does exist, or maybe he exists, possibly he exists. So this person apparently, in frustration, came up with the idea and said, listen, I'll tell you what, you really believe that God doesn't exist? You're so sure of yourself, even though you have no evidence to say so? Right, and anybody from the outside could see it was coming from an emotional thing, because the intellectual evidence just is not there. There's way more evidence to believe in God as the designer and creator of the universe than there is not. So something's wrong. Something's very incomplete in that other perspective. So he said to this person, right? So I'll tell you what, if you don't believe in God and you're convinced, how about you say the following thing? God, if you do exist, I want you to strike my mother down dead right now. Go ahead. You say that. I couldn't do it. That's what they say. I wasn't there. But even if it didn't happen, and you use it on somebody, could a person really say that kind of a thing? I mean, who could say that kind of a thing? I was once listening to a radio show in Toronto, driving my car. Interesting show about whether or not, this goes back to the 1990s, and whether or not that we should use animals to test drugs that might save human beings. And people calling yes, no, yes, no. One guy called it, and he said, no, we should not use animals. It's not moral. So the newscast, the guy, the radio talk show host, he says to this person, he says, you're telling me that if your son was dying from some disease, and there was a possible drug that might work to save his life, but they have to test it on an animal first, that you would prefer they don't use the animal to test it and your son doesn't get the medication? And he's like, silence. Complete. You could feel, I could be imagining it, but almost like you could feel his brain going, well, if I say no, I'll sound like a hypocrite, but if I say yes, then I'll sound like I'm insensitive to my son's life. He didn't have to do, right? And you could feel the pause was like, he didn't have to answer. He didn't expect that question back from this person, right? And finally he fell for the trap. He fell for the trap. And he said he feels that the animal should not be used to test the drug that might save his son, but it wasn't over yet. Because this guy, the radio show radio talk show host, at that point in time, he goes, "What? Are you kidding me? Are you telling me you'd let your son die instead of an animal?" Because and it goes on, and you could just feel or imagine this guy shrinking and shrinking because he did not come back and defend his point. He did not sound strong after that. I think he realized the stupidity of his statement, and he got caught in the trap. Right, and that person who I can't. How do I say? How do I say it? How can I possibly because what if I'm wrong? Oh, what do you just said you're not wrong? You're just so confident that you're not wrong. Yes, because there was no consequence attached to it, or so I thought. The biggest reason why people don't believe in God is not because there's evidence to the contrary. Not even the Holocaust is evidence to the contrary. That's for sure not. I mean, there's all kinds of explanations. We don't like the explanations. They hurt, right? And sometimes they fall short for us, but there's certainly explanations. The Holocaust is not a question mark. It's just a very difficult emotional thing to cope with and to deal with. But the Torah itself addresses the issue well in advance of it and talks about it. We don't know which sins caused it. We don't know who's responsible. We can't point the finger. Why 1 million children? Yeah, those are all great, not great, but they're important questions. But it doesn't mean it can't be explained. It just means we don't have the answers yet. There's a difference between not being able to explain something and an answer not existing. That's all. And as long as God has patience and he sits in Shemayim, Kivyochel, and he just watches the world go down the world of chaos, null and void and destruction that he brought it back from, and doesn't do anything, doesn't send the lightning down from the sky to strike the person because they blasphemed his name, doesn't yell down, no, you can't do things like that, and fool with laws like that and change creation like that. He doesn't do it. He just sits back and he says, let's man tie his own noose and hang himself until he has to come into history and set the record straight. That's all. The only reason why people don't feel the need to believe in God is because God doesn't push himself onto the world. That's all. But if he did, in 2 seconds, a person said, I don't believe it, lightning, thunder, I'm a believer, just like that. And that will happen, right? At some point in time, he'll come down, he'll reintroduce himself in history, and then the believers will, I told you so. And the other one will go, oh my God, what am I going to do now? People will kill themselves when they find out that their whole life that was invested in a lack of belief in God was completely wrong, like Yosef's brothers. That's the whole thing. But put a consequence to it, all of a sudden, this guy had to say to kill his mother. Now, if he doesn't like his mother, it's not going to work. But assuming that he doesn't want to be a murderer, be indirectly or a cause of it, he couldn't say the words. And who would say the words? Because no matter how bold and how arrogant you are, it would be the stupidest thing in the world. And that's the only way to describe it. It's like investing in a stock, much worse, but a small example, investing in a stock that you haven't investigated, a little bit about it, a little bit. And for some reason, you're inspired to make the investment, but not knowing all the downside. But you go with it anyhow. It's reckless. It's reckless not to at least have doubt in your opinion if you're an atheist or agnostic. Because what if you're wrong? And then, of course, they haven't even looked at all the sources that address the issue. I mean, remember the Bible criticism, for example, is so incomplete. I mean, the opinions and the conclusions they draw without even looking at the Hebrew sources half the time, or talking to people who are authorities in these sources going back for thousands of years. They're not interested. It's Kilo, the Jewish people can't possibly know the truth, even though they taught this of the world. But that's man. That's the Russia. Because what's the driving force? What's behind all that? Truth seeking? Any truth seeker I've ever met, in my life at least, has been somebody who hasn't simply abandoned the reality of God or turned their back on the possibility of God. Somebody who went the full distance to find out if he actually exists. And if you go the full distance, not only does God help you find him, but invariably, inevitably, you find enough information to say that he does exist. And that's why people end up finding him after some time, not because it's simply just blind faith, but rather because they've informed faith. It's actually blind faith to not believe in God, because it's big chesronis. So even people like some of the greatest scientists today, who push evolution and push a randomly evolving universe and things like that, what's the driving force? Mitzrayim, Egypt, but not the Egypt that's today exists south of Eretz Israel, not the Egypt that was back in Moshe Rabbeinu's time. All those Egypts were not even known today, but the one in Moshe's time, that it's symbolic. It's not even symbolic. It was a projection of reality. Very simply, the Jewish people were to Mitzrayim and the Egyptians what the soul is to the body, and vice versa, obviously. Your soul is in Shibur. Your soul is in exile, is in oppression. Doesn't belong down here, not this body. In the beginning, Adam Rishon's body, his body was a much higher level. It was more like a soul. They actually called Kesonos Or, right? Clothing made from light. He didn't have clothing like this. He didn't need clothing like this. As Rashi points out, it was the gaining of the knowledge of good and evil that created the need for fences. They saw now how you could use the creation in an abusive way. So now they were aware of the fact they weren't wearing clothing, and therefore they had to start wearing clothing. But before that, they were completely Hashem Shemayim, completely altruistic, serving God only with everything they had. There was no other possibility. They were made from light. When Adam began to look at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, get involved in the possibility of using creation according to his own will, so then the whole world became physicalized. It's a long Kabbalistic process that's worth having a shir into itself, and the Leshem speaks about this extensively. But that was the transformation. But before that, Adam was made like a soul. His body was much more like a soul than is like our bodies today. This clothing that we have today of skin, that's the real clothing we inherited as a result of the Chet. The Medrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu had to die, he's called Ish Elokim. At the end of his life, he's called Ish Elokim, a man of God, but actually it means, the Medrash says that he was half Ish, half man, and half Elokim, half angel, half godly being, from the waist up. He was like an angel. When he went on Mount Sinai, God transformed him, because you can't go to Shemayim like this. It's not like you're a visitor, a guest in Shemayim. No, he had to be transformed to become an angelic being, which he did the rest of his life. That's how he lived the rest of his life. So when it came time to die, and the Malach HaMavis was sent down to get his neshama, both his body and soul would not let go of each other. The soul said, this is what it's all about. You sent me down here to do this. I mean, this body is the perfect specimen. This is Adam before the Chet. This is what the world to come is going to be like. And you want me to separate now? And the body said, I can't live without the soul. The soul is my teacher. It's my guide, my life force. And they were in love with each other. So Kush Baruch had to do it himself in the end. Questioning what that means and how he actually died, but actually he was exposed as he died by the Shika, which means divine kiss. But basically it means that Akash Baruch Hu gave him such a revelation of himself to Moshe Rabbeinu that it literally sucked the soul of the body. They couldn't hold on strong enough, like being in a hurricane, a spiritual hurricane. But the point is that the body and the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu were completely on the same page, spiritual page. Wasn't that the soul got dragged? No matter what the body does to the soul may be dragged down. You see that people act animalistic. People act like they have no soul, but the soul's in pain. It's not like the soul's, okay, you win, I'll be like you. No, the soul cannot be like the body. No way, no how. It suffers the entire time that the body is dragging the soul through its material lifestyle. The soul is suffering. It will never give up its spiritual reality. It can't. It's not built in any way. But the body can be elevated to the level of soul, or at least very close to it, and certainly high up. And that's what was supposed to happen from day one in Mitzrayim. In fact, that's what the Rizal brings down. That's what Mitzrayim is supposed to be for. We're supposed, instead of going down to the Mem Tesharaitum, the 49 gates of impurity, we're supposed to elevate the entire Mitzrayim to the level of the 50 levels of Kedusha instead. And had that happened, then we wouldn't have needed matzah. Then we wouldn't have gone bechipazah. On the contrary, we would have simply just morphed into the Messianic era, just transformed, very smoothly into the Messianic era. So our souls are trapped inside of our bodies. And as long as they are, you know what it's like? It's like watching a war go on between Russia and Ukraine. We see a bully in another country having to pay the price for all of that. It's like that's like the body is a bully. The body forces its way onto the soul. The soul is defenseless if it's not being fortified and built up through Torah and mitzvahs. That's what Hashem gave it to us for. So the soul is enslaved in Mitzrayim. If you don't feed your soul, if you don't build up your soul, remember the Aleph from Vayikra and Vayika, right? That's the soul. If you don't build the Aleph, then basically all you're left with is the Daled Mem of Adam, right? Because Adam is Aleph Daled Mem. The Aleph stands for the soul. The Daled Mem means blood, stands for the body because blood represents the physical life. And if you don't build up that Aleph, all you're left with is the physicality of the person, and that enslaves the soul. That the shibud, the oppression, the exile of the Jewish people was the exile of the Jewish soul. Today, yesterday, back in Mitzrayim. The whole Geula, the whole redemption from Mitzrayim was the freeing of the Jewish soul. You free the soul, you free everything. The body, everything. If you only work on freeing the body, it's hard. It takes an army, as the Jewish people told Moshe Rabbeinu. It takes planning, it takes money, it takes strategy, it takes having to convince the UN. It takes all these physical things because you're only dealing in the physical world. But if you free that soul, the whole world automatically, Memela, walks into redemption as the Jewish people did in Parshas Bo. Not even the dog barked or wagged its tongue. Why does the Torah tell you that? Why does the Torah tell you that? Yeah, because it's the most natural thing. You ever see what happens to dogs when they see people, right, walking by? A lot of people walking. What dogs are going to do? They're going to bark. They're going to make noises. Cats are going to it's natural. And the Torah is telling you even that natural element of a simple dog doing a simple bark didn't happen because the Jewish soul became so freed. And that's why the Rasha asked his question. That he's not asking the question, I really like to make an intellectual study of this and understand what it's all about so I can take it to heart much more. So tell me, what is this Korban Pesach thing so I can better do it and then, and practice the whole thing and integrate the message. That's the Chacham. The Chacham, the moment you come from that's the whole thing, by the way. I mean, if you recall that the whole difference between Moshe Rabbeinu, the whole difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam, why even comparing? Because the Medrash says that the Kodesh Baruch Hu, to make sure that the nations of the world would not come back at the end of days and say to God, well, had you given us a prophet like Moshe, we also would have received Torah and done Torah and earned the reward in the world to come that the Jewish people are getting. To avoid that, God gave them a prophet as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Who is that? Bilam, the Rasha. Are there trade-ins? It's like, how does that solve the problem? On the contrary, it makes the question even stronger. God, you wanted to give us a fair chance and give us a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. Not only did you not give us a Moshe Rabbeinu, you give us a guy in the other direction altogether. He's even worse than a simple, bad guy. He's a Rasha, and that's our fair shot. So the answer, of course, is it's midah k'neged midah. As the Medrash points out, Moshe equals the whole Jewish people, but it also means he's a reflection of the Jewish people. The leaders of the Jewish people, the Maharsha says, reflect the Jewish people. What the Jewish people are holding, that's how the leaders are going to play out. So if Bilam is what he is, it's because the people he's meant to lead are like that. So what are they like? So the Pri Tzaddik says that the difference is that Moshe Rabbeinu, he knew unbelievable amounts of knowledge. Bilam knew unbelievable amount. He knew Das Elyon. He knew God intimately, so to speak. So how could he be a Rasha? Because everything he knew up here didn't go down here, which we said in the past. That's what Amalek attacks, what Amalek tries to create. He cuts the heart off from the head. That's the whole thing. He cuts the heart off from the head. That you cannot feel, because where the heart goes, that's where the person goes. Where the head goes, not necessarily. That's why people can know that smoking is bad for you and still smoke. They know that overeating is no good, but they'll still overeat. They know that speaking Lashon Hara is dangerous, but they'll still speak Lashon Hara. But the moment that knowledge makes it from here down to here into your heart, you can't do it anymore. All of a sudden, it hurts too much. It's too much of a violation of self to do those things. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu allowed his knowledge to go down to his heart, and he was therefore one with it and real with it. As a result of that, he was one of the freest people mankind has ever known, at least since the Chet of Adam Rishon. Bilam was one of the most enslaved. And that's really what Galus Mitzrayim was all about. That's what Par was after from day one. That was the whole thing. He tried to make it that we could not learn Torah either, because that certainly makes it easier to control the Jewish population and their lifestyle and how they're approaching life. But the main thing was to make it that their heart wasn't connected. And I know from personal experience Sometimes you say you go to teal or trip or something like that. I've gone someplace where I've been involved in some very, very difficult labor, and I come back at the end of the day and I'm just totally wiped out, just like burned out, and I'm dirty and filthy, and I'm going to take a shower and I have no energy left whatsoever. And it comes time to daven mincha. The mincha is important to me. All daven is important to me, and I try to have as much energy to daven minchas, and it hurts me if I go to daven and I don't focus. I get distracted, and I can't put my heart into my tefillah. It hurts me. But all of a sudden, I'm burned out like that, and I'm totally wasted from what I was doing. It's like you just become desensitized. It's like, I can't care about this right now. I just don't have the crack to care about it right now, or about what's going on over here, what's going on over there, what's happening in the Ukraine. There's already so many bad things in the world. It's like you just become desensitized. And that's what Amalek does, and that's what Paro does. It's all part of the same idea. And that's the enslavement. And that's the Russia. The Russia is he's not coming to ask the question to understand it better so he can become more in line with it. He's coming because his soul is so cut off, his heart is so cut off from his mind, that he's looking for a way to completely abandon the spiritual and just simply feed his body. And that's why we can say to him, if you were to come like that in Mitzrayim, that would be your whole approach by the 8th plague. You wouldn't even have found reason to leave. You would have chosen to stay and not gone out and received Torah and missed out on the world to come, for that matter. So the whole Inyan we've been building up from Parsha Shmos and working our way through Tu B'Shvat, and then Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, and finally Purim just last week, and moving towards Pesach and Leil Seder. It's been about rebuilding that soul. So that's why the very first plague in Mitzrayim is Makas Dam, because when Moshe Rabbeinu went down to Mitzrayim at the beginning, before the plagues began, the Jewish people were Mem Tershari. What does it mean to be a Mem Tershari Tumah? Well, you have the Aleph and the Dal and the Mem. The Aleph is very small. The soul, right, from the word V'yikra, the soul is crushed. It's enslaved inside the body, inside the taivas and the gaivas and the wants and everything, that drive us physically, materially. It doesn't have a say. Just look at the world around us. It's all body. The soul's crushed. It's not directing anybody except a few people who happen to know what's going on and go by it and live by it and are freed by it. So the whole point of the Makos, the whole point of the plague, really come against the Russia. They come against this whole philosophy, come against Mitzrayim. How? Simply by building the Aleph. You build the Aleph, by definition, you reduce the Russia. They're two sides, of a continuum. By definition, the more you give to one, the more you take away from the other. So by building the Aleph, you increase the word Adam, you add the Aleph to the Daled Mem, you take them out of Mem Tershari Tumah, and you turn them from Rishoyim into Chachamim by Makas Becharis, and leave Mitzrayim. So that's what the first plague is done. Blood. Why blood? Why not something else? Because there's all kinds of things you can do to pollute the Nile River and make the point that God runs the world. But why blood? Because it was a way of telling the Jewish people, this is where you're holding. You're on the level of the Russia right now. In the level of the goof, your soul is enslaved. You've been assimilating. You're Mem Tershari Tumah. You're worshiping the same idols as Egypt is worshiping. And that's got to change. So we're going to now take you back to school, and we're going to teach you about the Aleph. We're going to rebuild it. So every plague from that point onward is an increasement of the revelation of God's light. The first plague, the second plague, because you can see, if it's destroying Mitzrayim, it has to be building the Jewish people. If it's reducing the koyach of the Sitra Achra and Tumah, impurity, by definition, it has to be building up the side of Kedusha, holiness. There's no void, there's no gap. It's one or the other. It's like a seesaw, right? So as the light increases, second plague, third plague, fourth plague, fifth plague, the light gets stronger. Even Paro is forced to admit it's God. The Chartamim even before that. And he gets to the point where he has to be molded and let the Jewish people go out eventually. So by Makas Becharis, right? The aleph is now completely resuscitated, completely revived. And as a result of that, it's no longer just dam, it's adam. Aleph, daled, mem. And the gematria, very conveniently, of the word adam happens to also equal the word geula, which means redemption. Adam equals geula. Not just a human being equals geula. No, we're made b'tselem Elokim. As Sforno points out, it's a potential. You're not made at the beginning in that perfect state. You're made in the beginning with the potential for that perfect state. But the rest of your life is to build up the aleph through Torah learning, mitzvahs, midas development, character development, all the things that make you more godly in life. And it sounds like to the world that that's enslavement, because that's what the body tells you. Just like the media today tells you what you should want and not want, and a lot of it's against your will. It's against what's good for you. Someone else is making money off it. Someone else is making something off of it. But for you, it's you don't need it. It's not good for you. It's not healthy. It's not important. It's a waste of your money. But you've been taught and trained to think like that. So the body tells you, wow, you're talking about freeing the soul? That's our slave? Yeah, you're right. It is. It's enslavement of the body. But that's okay, because anything the soul does for the body, by definition, is good for the body. So the body's not going to lose out. It says that one of the stages of Gehenna, of purgatory after a person dies, is that a person goes they're in the ground, right? Depending upon how spiritual they were during their lifetime, and they have to watch their body rot. They don't realize that they're watching their body. They just see their body rot. They don't realize that they're outside their body because they're dead. They just see their body. They identify with their body because they did their entire lifetime, and they're watching the body rot. And the soul's going, oh my God, we're rotting. This is terrible. Look at this. Whoa, worms going in and out of the skin, and over time it's like panicking because it feels at any time now it's going to disappear. And find the body, it becomes so unrecognizable that the soul goes, we're no longer here anymore. Wait, who said that? Uh-oh. Turns out I'm not the body after all. Because otherwise, how am I here watching all this and talking about it? Oh boy, did I make a mistake. I lived my entire life like I was a body. Turns out that I'm a soul. Didn't do things the way my soul wanted to do it, more like my body wanted to do it. That's where the rush is coming from, and that's where the Haggadah and the Seder is coming from. It's coming against that. The Seder, the Haggadah, if you want to free the Jewish people, you have to free their souls. Start with yourself, start with your family. Right? But you have to understand that if you don't build up the aleph, if you don't transform yourself from only dam into a dam, if you don't go the full distance to understand what it means that you are first and foremost a soul, and that becomes the guiding factor in your life, you're enslaved. No matter how happy you are, no matter how much you smile, no matter how much you think that life is a blast, it doesn't make a difference. At some point in time, we wake up and realize the truth. And the worst thing of all is finding out after the fact. It's not you're going to say, I wish I had known earlier, back at my bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, that was the case. But listen, I lived 80 years of my life and I had a good time, doing the wrong thing, When Yosef's brothers heard him say, Ani Yosef, they didn't say, oops, that was a mistake. But in the meantime, Baruch Hashem, had a good time. We ate out, and we got together, but okay, we blew it about Yosef, but that's just one thing. That wasn't it at all. The entire 22 years were like as if they didn't happen, as if they were eradicated and erased. The pain was unbelievable to the point of shock. Haggadah, Seder, Pesach. That's the opportunity to get back on track, not just to commemorate, but to replay, to relive. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we've been building towards the entire time. So if we don't get together again, B'ezras Hashem, before Pesach, you should have a Chag Kodesh B'Sameach. You should be zeicha to rebuild your aleph. You should be zeicha to be able to reach such high madregas in a world that's so enslaved to the goof and the mentality of the goof. You should merit to rise above it, live your life as a soul, and experience freedom like never before.